A bullied teen stood up for a classmate. This was the moment that changed everything for Marcus Wilson. In the hallway of Westlake High, where laughter usually meant someone was about to get hurt, he finally found his voice. Marcus kept his head down as he navigated the crowded school corridor. His tall frame hunched as if trying to disappear. The sleeves of his worn hoodie stretched over his knuckles, a habit formed over years of wanting to hide. 3 months at Westlake High had taught him the rhythms of survival, which hallways to avoid, when to be invisible, how to make himself small despite his height. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everyone in the same sickly pale glow. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest as he approached his locker. The metal dented from last week when Donovan Hayes had slammed him against it. His fingers trembled slightly as he spun the combination. Left, right, left. A small ritual of normalcy in a place that felt like a battlefield. "Please, just give it back," a voice quavered from around the corner. Marcus froze, his hand still on the lock. He recognized that tone, the desperate edge of someone trying not to cry. The sound was achingly familiar, an echo of his own voice from countless similar moments. "What are you going to do about it, Four Eyes? Call your daddy?" Donovan's voice boomed, followed by mocking laughter from his ever-present entourage. Marcus could walk away. He should walk away. That's what everyone did when Donovan found a new target. That's what Marcus himself had done too many times to count. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of each heartbeat in his throat as he closed his locker with a soft click. His feet moved before his brain could object. Around the corner, a smaller boy with wire-rimmed glasses was backed against the wall. Oliver Parker, quiet, smart, always alone. Marcus had seen him in advanced math, head down, answering questions only when directly called upon. Now Oliver's face was flushed, eyes glassy with unshed tears, as Donovan held a notebook overhead, just out of reach. "Those are my college application essays," Oliver said, voice breaking. "Please, college?" Donovan sneered, flipping through pages. "Listen to this garbage. My greatest challenge has been finding my voice in a world that—" He stopped, noticing Marcus hovering at the edge of the scene. "Well, look who it is." Tower Boy decided to join us. The hallway seemed to contract. Other students slowed their pace, sensing the potential for drama, the kind that would be whispered about for days. Marcus felt his palms dampen with sweat. His mouth went dry. "Walk away. Just walk away." But then he caught Oliver's eyes, wide, frightened, and something else. A silent plea that Marcus recognized because he'd made it himself so many times. The unspoken prayer that just once, someone would stop and say, "Enough. Give it back to him." Marcus's voice emerged stronger than he expected, carrying down the hallway. Donovan blinked, momentarily thrown by the unexpected challenge. "What did you just say to me, Wilson?" Marcus took a step forward, heart hammering so hard he was certain everyone could hear it. "I said give Oliver his essays back." The air in the hallway thickened. Students who had been pretending not to watch now openly stared. Donovan's friends exchanged glances, uncertain how to react to this deviation from the usual script. "Since when do you care about Four Eyes?" Donovan's voice held a dangerous edge. He took a step closer, using his bulk to intimidate. "You developing a crush or something?" Laughter rippled through the growing audience, but it sounded hollow, forced. Marcus felt his face burn but didn't back down. His mind raced with all the possible outcomes, most of them ending with him on the receiving end of Donovan's fists later. Yet somehow that seemed less important now. "I don't need to have a crush on someone to know what you're doing is wrong," Marcus said, the words spilling out with gathering momentum. "Those essays matter to him, just like your stupid football playbook matters to you." A murmur went through the crowd. Donovan had thrown an epic tantrum when someone had hidden his playbook before the homecoming game. "You don't know what you're talking about," Donovan said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Don't I?" Marcus took another step forward. "How would you feel if someone took something you worked hard on and threatened to destroy it just because they could? Just to feel powerful for 5 minutes?" The hallway had gone utterly silent. No shuffling feet, no whispers. Just the oppressive hum of fluorescent lights and the sound of Marcus's own blood rushing in his ears. "You think you're so smart," Donovan said, but his eyes darted around, suddenly aware of the audience, of how this looked, of the shifting atmosphere. "No," Marcus said quietly. "I think I've been stupid. I think we've all been stupid letting you get away with this. Every single day." With each emphasized word, Marcus took another step forward until he stood between Donovan and Oliver. He was taller than the bully by at least 2 inches, a fact he'd always tried to minimize by hunching. Now he straightened his spine, looking down at Donovan with steady eyes. Gibru, where Gibru? Him. Antoine back. His essays. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Marcus braced himself, certain that violence would follow. Instead, something unexpected crossed Donovan's face. A flicker of uncertainty, maybe even respect. Without breaking eye contact, Donovan extended the notebook toward Oliver, who quickly snatched it back, clutching it to his chest. Whatever, Donovan muttered. Wasn't worth my time anyway. He backed away, pointing at Marcus. This isn't over, Wilson. But the threat sounded hollow, even to Donovan himself. He retreated with his friends in tow. Their usual swagger diminished. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus finally exhaled, a tremor running through his body as adrenaline gave way to disbelief at what he'd just done. He turned to find Oliver staring at him, eyes wide behind smudged glasses. Why did you do that? Oliver asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Now he's going to target you even more. Marcus shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. I don't know. I guess. I know what it feels like. And those essays seemed important. They are, Oliver said, looking down at the notebook, then back at Marcus with a sincerity that was almost painful. Thank you. The warning bell rang, startling them both. Students hurried to classes, the incident already fading into the background noise of high school life. I should go, Marcus said, turning to leave. Wait. Oliver hesitated, then held out his hand. I'm Oliver Parker. Marcus looked at the extended hand, feeling an odd sense of vertigo. Something significant had shifted, though he couldn't yet name it. He reached out and shook Oliver's hand. Marcus Wilson. I know. Oliver said with a small smile. Everyone knows who the tallest guy in school is. As Marcus headed to class, he felt a strange lightness. The hallway seemed brighter somehow, the air easier to breathe. He had no way of knowing that this small act of courage would ripple outward, changing not just his life, but the entire ecosystem of Westlake High. He certainly had no idea that Oliver Parker was the principal's son. Principal Richard Parker sat in his office, rubbing his temples as he reviewed the latest budget reports. 23 years in education had taught him that school administration was mostly about fighting for resources that never seemed adequate. The fluorescent light above his desk flickered. Another maintenance issue he'd have to postpone addressing. A soft knock on his door provided a welcome interruption. Come in, he called, setting aside the spreadsheets. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Gonzalez, his administrative assistant, whose efficiency kept the school running. Your son is here to see you, Mr. Parker. Richard's eyebrows rose. Oliver rarely came to his office during school hours. An unspoken agreement between them. Oliver had made it clear when Richard took the principal position 2 years ago that he didn't want special treatment or attention. He wanted to be just another student, not the principal's kid. Send him in, please. Oliver entered, clutching a notebook to his chest. Richard immediately noticed his son's flushed face and slightly disheveled appearance. Everything okay? He asked, concern rising. Oliver closed the door behind him and sat in the chair across from Richard's desk. For a moment, he said nothing, seemingly gathering his thoughts. I just wanted to tell you something, Oliver finally said, his voice steady despite his obvious agitation. There's this student, Marcus Wilson. He just stood up for me when Donovan Hayes was, well, being Donovan Hayes. Richard's jaw tightened. Donovan Hayes was a frequent visitor to the office, a talented athlete with an attitude problem, and parents who were quick to threaten lawsuits whenever disciplinary action was suggested. What happened exactly? Richard asked, working to keep his tone neutral, to be the principal rather than the protective father his instincts urged him to be. Oliver recounted the incident in the hallway, his voice growing stronger as he described how Marcus had intervened. He didn't know I was watching, but his hands were shaking the whole time, Dad. He was terrified, but he still did it. Oliver's eyes shone with something like wonder. No one's ever done that before. Richard felt a complicated mix of emotions. Gratitude toward this Marcus Wilson, shame that his son had needed someone else to protect him, and a deeper discomfort at what this revealed about the atmosphere in his school. If bullying this blatant was happening in the hallways, what else was he missing? Thank you for telling me, Richard said carefully. Do you want me to address this with Donovan? Oliver's expression immediately closed. No, that would just make everything worse. I'm not telling you as the principal. I'm telling you as my dad. He hesitated. I just thought you should know that there are good people here. Really good people. Richard studied his son's face, seeing a new light there. Oliver had struggled to make connections since they'd moved to Westlake after the divorce. 2 years of watching his outgoing, curious child withdraw into himself had been one of the hardest parts of their fresh start. Tell me more about this Marcus Wilson, Richard said, leaning back in his chair. Oliver's expression softened. He's in my AP math class, but he sits in the back and never participates. Mister, Benson thinks he's not trying, but I've seen his tests. He gets almost everything right. He just doesn't show his work the way Benson wants. Richard made a mental note to pull Marcus's file. Anything else? He's really tall, tallest kid in school. Keeps to himself mostly. I think he transferred here this year. Oliver hesitated. And I think Donovan and his friends have been giving him a hard time too. I see. Richard tapped his pen against the desk, thinking. And you're sure you don't want me to intervene? I'm sure, Oliver said firmly. But, I thought maybe I could invite him to sit with me at lunch sometime. He looked down at his hands. If that's okay. Richard felt a surge of pride at his son's compassion. I think that's more than okay, Ollie. That's exactly what he might need. The bell rang, signaling the end of the period. Oliver stood, clutching his notebook. I should get to biology. Of course. Richard stood as well, coming around the desk. He wanted to hug his son, but knew that physical displays of affection at school were firmly against the unspoken rules Oliver had established. Instead, he simply placed a hand on his shoulder. I'm proud of you, you know. Oliver gave a small smile. For what? I didn't do anything. Marcus is the one who stood up to Donovan. You're recognizing courage and kindness when you see it, Richard said. And you're responding with kindness of your own. That takes a different kind of courage. A slight flush colored Oliver's cheeks. Thanks, Dad. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Mom called last night. She wants me to visit for Christmas. Richard felt the familiar pang at the mention of his ex-wife. Do you want to go? Oliver shrugged, a gesture that conveyed volumes. I don't know yet. Well, there's time to decide. We can talk about it at home. After Oliver left, Richard sat heavily in his chair, thoughts swirling. He pulled up the student database on his computer and searched for Marcus Wilson. The file showed a student who had transferred from Lakeside High across town 3 months ago. Average grades despite high standardized test scores. No disciplinary issues. No extracurriculars. Emergency contact listed as grandmother, Eleanor Wilson. Richard leaned back, considering. Every instinct told him there was more to this student's story. And now somehow, that story had intersected with his son's in a way that put a spark back in Oliver's eyes. A spark that had been missing since Gloria had announced she'd fallen in love with her business partner and was moving to Chicago. He closed the file, making a decision. He wouldn't intervene directly, respecting Oliver's wishes, but he would pay closer attention. To Marcus Wilson, to Donovan Hayes, and to all the dynamics playing out in the hallways beyond his office door. Sometimes the most important parts of being an educator happened outside the classroom, in the moments between bells when students revealed who they truly were. The cafeteria at Westlake High operated by strict, unwritten rules. Each table had its designated occupants: athletes, theater kids, academic competitors, and various other social classifications that teenagers excelled at creating and enforcing. Marcus had learned this quickly upon arrival, eventually settling for a spot at the far corner table near the trash cans. It wasn't ideal, but it was relatively safe, occupied by other students who valued invisibility over social standing. Today, Marcus set his tray down at his usual place, mechanically unwrapping his sandwich without really seeing it. His mind kept replaying the morning's confrontation with Donovan. Part of him glowed with quiet pride. Another part anxiously anticipated the inevitable retaliation. Is this seat taken? Marcus looked up, startled to find Oliver Parker standing across from him, lunch tray in hand, a tentative smile on his face. No, Marcus managed, glancing around to see if this was some kind of setup. The cafeteria's established order didn't allow for spontaneous seating changes without social consequences. Oliver sat down, arranging his food with methodical precision, a stark contrast to Marcus's haphazard approach. I never thanked you properly for what you did this morning. You did, actually, Marcus said, still wary. In the hallway, Oliver shook his head. That wasn't proper. That was just, I was still processing. Marcus took a bite of his sandwich to avoid responding immediately. The strange new feeling of being sought out, of being seen, was both exhilarating and terrifying. I've been at Westlake for 2 years. Oliver continued, his voice quiet enough that only Marcus could hear. You're the first person who's ever stepped in like that. The simple statement hung between them, heavy with implications. Marcus set down his sandwich, suddenly not hungry. Why me? He asked. I mean, why sit here today? You don't have to. I don't need a reward or anything. It wasn't a big deal. Oliver studied him, head tilted slightly. It was to me. He paused. And I'm not sitting here as a reward. I'm sitting here because you're probably the most interesting person in this school, and I'd like to know you better. Marcus blinked, thrown by the frank assessment. Me? Interesting. I think you've got the wrong guy. No, Oliver said with surprising firmness. I don't think I do. He took a deliberate bite of his apple, then added, did you know there are 17 different species of ladybugs in this state alone? The non sequitur caught Marcus off guard. What? Ladybugs. 17 species. Most people think there's just one kind, the red one with black spots, but there's incredible diversity. Some are orange, some are yellow. Some have stripes instead of spots. Oliver's eyes lit up as he spoke. Things that seem simple rarely are, once you look closer. Despite himself, Marcus felt a smile tugging at his lips. Are you comparing me to a ladybug? Oliver grinned. Only in the most scientific and complimentary way possible. A laugh escaped Marcus, a genuine laugh that felt foreign in his throat. How long had it been since he'd laughed at school? So what are you into? Oliver asked, seamlessly shifting the conversation. Besides heroically standing up to the school's least eligible bachelor? I like to draw, Marcus admitted, then immediately regretted the disclosure. He never talked about his art. It was private, safe, one of the few things that belonged entirely to him. But Oliver's face brightened with genuine interest. Really? Oh, what kind of stuff? Marcus hesitated, then reached for his backpack, pulling out a worn sketchbook before he could reconsider. He flipped through until he found a drawing he didn't hate, a detailed study of hands in different positions, the intricate lines of knuckles and veins rendered in careful graphite. Oliver's eyes widened. Whoa, that's incredible. You're seriously talented. The praise felt like sunshine breaking through clouds. Marcus quickly closed the sketchbook, embarrassed but pleased. It's just practice. I want to do graphic novels someday, or maybe concept art for games. That's awesome, Oliver said, and the simple validation unlocked something in Marcus. Conversation flowed more easily after that. They discovered shared interests in sci-fi and fantasy, a mutual disdain for their history textbooks' oversimplified narratives, and a common experience of feeling like outsiders looking in on the high school experience rather than participants in it. So why did you transfer schools in your junior year? Oliver asked eventually, the question gentle but direct. Marcus tensed. It's complicated. Oliver nodded, accepting the boundary without pushing. Complicated is rarely simple, he said with a small smile, referencing their earlier ladybug conversation. Before Marcus could respond, a shadow fell across their table. Donovan Hayes stood there, flanked by two of his ever-present teammates. Well, isn't this touching? Donovan said, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby tables. Tower Boy and Four Eyes sitting in a tree. Marcus felt his muscles tighten, preparing for fight or flight. But Oliver surprised him by speaking first. Do you need something, Donovan? His voice was calm, almost disinterested. We're kind of in the middle of a conversation. Donovan's eyes narrowed at the dismissal. Yeah, I need something. I need to understand why Wilson here thinks he can change the natural order of things. He leaned in, planting his hands on the table. See, there's a way things work around here. People like me are at the top. People like you two aren't. Marcus felt a flicker of the morning's courage returning. Maybe that's the problem. Huh, nah. What did you say? Donovan's voice dropped dangerously. He said maybe that's the problem. Marcus repeated louder this time. Maybe the natural order is just an excuse for people to be cruel without consequences. The cafeteria had grown quieter, the drama drawing attention. From the corner of his eye, Marcus saw a teacher looking their way from the faculty table. Donovan seemed to notice too. His posture shifted slightly, aggression tempered by calculation. You think this little rebellion of yours changes anything? Just wait. By next week, everything will be back to normal. And you'll both remember your place. He straightened, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Enjoy your lunch, ladies. As Donovan and his friends walked away, Marcus released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Sorry about that. For what? Oliver asked, genuinely puzzled. For? I don't know. Making things worse? Marcus gestured vaguely. Now they're going to target you even more because you're sitting with me. Oliver shook his head. First, I chose to sit here. Second, Donovan was always going to be Donovan regardless. And third, he hesitated, then continued with surprising intensity. I'd rather have one friend who stands up for what's right than be left alone because it's safer. Friend. The word hung between them, a tentative bridge. Is that what we are? Marcus asked, his voice softer than intended. Friends? Oliver extended his hand across the table, an echo of their morning introduction, but weighted with new meaning. "I'd like to be if you would." Marcus looked at the offered hand, then at Oliver's earnest face. Something tight and protected in his chest loosened slightly. He reached out and shook Oliver's hand. "I'd like that too." As the bell signaled the end of lunch period, they gathered their things. A new ease between them. On the way out, Marcus caught sight of Principal Parker watching from the cafeteria entrance, his expression thoughtful. Marcus nodded politely, and to his surprise, the principal nodded back with what seemed like approval. Walking to class beside his new friend, Marcus felt a shift in the school's atmosphere. Or perhaps it was a shift within himself. Either way, the hallways seemed a little less hostile, the day a little brighter. One small act of courage had created a ripple he could not yet measure. And for the first time since arriving at Westlake High, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow. Lenore Wilson had seen enough of life's harshness to recognize when things were changing for her grandson. After raising Marcus's mother and watching helplessly as addiction claimed her, Eleanor had stepped in to raise Marcus when he was just 7. 10 years of loving a child scarred by abandonment had taught her to notice the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the small tells that indicated his emotional state. Tonight, there was something different in the way he moved around their small apartment kitchen, helping prepare dinner. A certain lightness, a loosening of the perpetual tension he carried in his shoulders. "Something good happened at school today?" she asked, keeping her tone casual as she chopped vegetables for the stir-fry. Marcus glanced up from where he was measuring rice, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "What makes you ask that?" Eleanor smiled. "Grandma's intuition. Plus, you haven't checked your phone for notifications once since you got home, which means either the internet has collapsed or you're not dreading tomorrow quite as much as usual." A faint color rose in Marcus's cheeks. He poured the rice into the cooker with careful precision. "I made a friend, I think." The simple statement carried such weight that Eleanor had to resist the urge to make too much of it. Since the incident at his previous school, Marcus had withdrawn, building walls that few could penetrate. "That's wonderful," she said, focusing on the vegetables to give him space. "Anyone I might have heard about?" "His name is Oliver Parker. He's in my AP math class." Marcus added water to the rice, measuring twice as he always did. "He's smart, different. Not in a bad way, just he sees things others don't. Including you," Eleanor thought but didn't say. "Well, I'd love to meet him sometime. Maybe he could come over for dinner? I promise not to embarrass you too much." Marcus smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Maybe. We'll see." They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, the rhythmic chopping and sizzling of the wok creating a soothing backdrop. Eleanor waited, sensing there was more to the story. "I stood up to someone today," Marcus finally said, his voice quiet but steady. "This guy who's always bullying people. He was giving Oliver a hard time, and I just couldn't watch it happen again." Pride swelled in Eleanor's chest alongside concern. "That was brave of you." "It didn't feel brave," Marcus admitted, leaning against the counter. "I was terrified. But afterwards, it felt right. Like maybe all the bad stuff that happened before wasn't the end of my story, you know?" Eleanor set down her knife and turned to face her grandson fully. At 17, he was already taller than most men, with his father's height and his mother's sensitive eyes. Those eyes had seen too much sadness for someone so young. "It never was the end of your story, Marcus," she said gently. "What happened at Lakeside, that was just a chapter. A painful one, yes, but not the whole book." Marcus nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I know that logically. It's just hard to believe it sometimes." Eleanor crossed the small kitchen and placed her hands on his shoulders, waiting until he met her eyes. "Listen to me. You are not defined by what was done to you, or even by how you reacted then. You're defined by the choices you make now, every day. And today you chose courage and kindness." She saw the glimmer of moisture in his eyes before he blinked it away, pulling her into a quick, fierce hug. "Thanks, Gran," he murmured against her hair. "Nothing to thank me for," she said, patting his back before returning to her cooking. "That's what grandmas are for, dispensing wisdom and making sure you don't starve." The moment of vulnerability passed, but its effect lingered in the comfortable silence that followed. As they sat down to dinner, Eleanor noticed Marcus checking his phone, a small smile playing at his lips. "Oliver?" she asked, nodding toward the phone. Marcus nodded. "He wants to know if I want to study for the math test with him tomorrow after school." "And do you?" "Yeah," Marcus said, the word carrying a weight of possibility. "I think I do." Later that night, as Eleanor prepared for bed, she paused at Marcus's door, left slightly ajar as always, a habit from when nightmares had regularly plagued his sleep. Inside, she could see him at his desk, bent over his sketchbook, drawing with an intensity she hadn't seen in months. Quietly, she continued to her room, offering a small prayer of gratitude to whatever forces had brought this Oliver Parker into her grandson's life. After all they'd been through, perhaps this was the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Marcus, but for both of them. The following week brought subtle but significant changes to the ecosystem of Westlake High. Marcus and Oliver, an unlikely duo, the tall, quiet artist and the principal's son, became a regular sight in the hallways and cafeteria. Their friendship, born of a single moment of courage, grew steadily through shared lunches, study sessions, and conversations that often lasted long after the final bell. For Oliver, who had spent 2 years cultivating invisibility as a defense mechanism, having an actual friend was revolutionary. For Marcus, who had arrived at Westlake carrying the weight of his past, Oliver's easy acceptance offered something he'd nearly forgotten existed: possibility. Principal Parker observed these developments with interest, both professional and personal. He noticed how his son's steps seemed lighter, how he'd begun talking more at dinner, sharing anecdotes about his day that increasingly featured Marcus Wilson. As an educator with over 2 decades of experience, Richard recognized the power of positive peer relationships. As a father who had watched helplessly as divorce had dimmed his son's natural brightness, he felt profound gratitude. On Thursday afternoon, Richard was reviewing attendance reports when Mrs. Gonzalez buzzed his intercom. "Mr. Parker, there's a situation in the gym hallway. Mr. Reeves has detained some students after an altercation." Richard sighed, already anticipating what awaited him. "I'll be right there." The scene in the hallway outside the gymnasium was depressingly familiar. Mr. Reeves, the PE teacher, standing with arms crossed between Donovan Hayes and Richard's stomach dropped. Marcus Wilson. Both boys bore the distinct look of those who had been in a physical confrontation. Donovan's lip was split, while Marcus had the beginnings of what would be an impressive black eye. "What happened here?" Richard asked, his principal voice firmly in place despite his concern. "Found these two throwing punches," Mr. Reeves said grimly. "Hayes says Wilson attacked him unprovoked. Wilson isn't saying much of anything." Richard turned to Marcus, whose tall frame was rigid with tension, eyes fixed on a point on the wall. "Mr. Wilson, is this true? Did you attack Donovan without provocation?" "No, sir," Marcus said quietly. "I didn't attack him first." "He's lying," Donovan interjected. "I was just walking to practice and he jumped me. Probably jealous because coach says I might get a football scholarship." Richard held up a hand to silence Donovan. "I'll hear from both of you separately." He turned to the small crowd of students that had gathered. "The rest of you need to get to where you're supposed to be. Now." As the onlookers dispersed, Richard noticed his son hovering at the edge of the group, face pale with concern. Their eyes met briefly before Oliver reluctantly turned and walked away. "Mr. Reeves, please escort Mr. Hayes to the nurse to have that lip looked at, then bring him to my office," Richard instructed. "Mr. Wilson, you'll come with me now." The walk to the administrative offices was silent. Richard noticed how Marcus kept his distance, as if expecting a blow. In his office, he gestured for Marcus to take a seat, then settled behind his desk, studying the young man carefully. "Let's try this again," Richard said, his tone measured. "What happened with Donovan Hayes?" Marcus looked down at his hands, which were scraped at the knuckles. "He and some of his friends cornered me after gym class, said it was time I learned my place." He paused. "I tried to walk away. I really did. But then he started saying things about my mother, about why I left my old school." Richard leaned forward slightly. "And what did he say?" A muscle worked in Marcus's jaw. "That she was a junkie who abandoned me. That I got kicked out of Lakeside for being a psycho." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "He said no wonder Oliver was my only friend, that he felt sorry for me." "I see," Richard said quietly. "And that's when you hit him?" Marcus shook his head. "No. I still tried to leave. Then he grabbed my sketchbook from my bag and started ripping out pages." Now Marcus looked up, and Richard was struck by the raw hurt in his eyes. "Those drawings, they're all I have of her, the way I remember her before everything went bad." Understanding dawned. Richard had reviewed Marcus's file after his conversation with Oliver the previous week. It noted that custody had been granted to the grandmother following the mother's incarceration for drug-related offenses. What it didn't capture was the human cost, the emotional weight this young man carried. "What happened to your sketchbook?" Richard asked. "One of Donovan's friends took it when the fighting started," Marcus said. "I don't know where it is now." Richard made a note. We'll find it. Now, am I correct in understanding that Donovan initiated physical contact, but you returned it? Yes, sir. Marcus's shoulders slumped. I know I'm supposed to walk away or tell a teacher, but in that moment, he trailed off. Sometimes our emotions override our better judgment. Richard said, neither condoning nor condemning. However, our school has a zero-tolerance policy for fighting, regardless of who started it. Marcus nodded, resignation in every line of his body. I understand. Are you going to expel me? The question hung in the air, weighted with more than just this incident. Richard sensed that for Marcus, expulsion would confirm a narrative he already believed about himself. That he didn't belong, that second chances weren't for people like him. No, Richard said firmly. I'm not going to expel you, but there will be consequences. 1 week of after-school detention starting tomorrow, and I'll need to call your grandmother. Relief flickered across Marcus's face before he managed to compose his expression. Yes, sir. I also want you to write something for me. Richard continued. A reflection on alternative ways you might have handled the situation, not because I don't understand why you reacted as you did, but because I want you to develop strategies for the future. I can do that, Marcus said. Okay, good. Richard leaned back in his chair. I'll be having a similar conversation with Mr. Hayes, and he'll be facing his own consequences, including returning your sketchbook intact. Marcus looked up, surprise evident. You believe me? About what happened? The question revealed volumes about this young man's past experiences with authority figures. Richard felt a surge of protective anger on his behalf. Yes, Marcus, I believe you, he said simply. And even if Donovan tells a different story, we have security cameras in that hallway. The truth has a way of making itself known. Marcus absorbed this, something shifting in his posture. Thank you, sir. Richard nodded, then made a decision that crossed the line between his professional and personal roles, a line he typically guarded carefully. My son thinks very highly of you, he said. In the 2 years we've been at Westlake, I've never seen him as animated as he's been this past week. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Oliver doesn't connect easily with people. After his mother and I separated, he withdrew into himself. But since you stood up for him, something's changed. Marcus looked uncomfortable with the praise. Oliver's a good person. He's helped me too. I believe that, Richard said. And that's why, while I can't condone fighting, I want you to know that your friendship matters. To him and by extension to me. The conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Gonzalez announcing Donovan's arrival. Richard asked Marcus to wait outside while he spoke with the other student. 30 minutes later, after a much more contentious discussion with Donovan, who maintained his innocence until confronted with the possibility of security footage, Richard watched from his office window as Marcus walked across the parking lot. Oliver was waiting by the bike rack, anxiety clear in his posture until he spotted his friend. Even from a distance, Richard could see the relief wash over his son's face. The two boys talked briefly, Oliver gesturing animatedly while Marcus nodded. Then in a gesture that squeezed Richard's heart, Oliver carefully inspected Marcus's bruised eye, concern evident in every line of his body. Watching them walk away together, Richard reflected on the strange, unpredictable ways lives intersected. 3 months ago, Marcus Wilson had been a name on a transfer form. Now he was an integral part of Oliver's life, and by extension, their family's story. Richard turned back to his desk, where Donovan Hayes' father would be arriving shortly to discuss his son's 2-week suspension. Such conversations were never pleasant, but they were necessary, because sometimes the most important lessons happened in the moments between classes, in hallways and parking lots, where young people discovered who they truly were and who they might become. Eleanor Wilson knew trouble when she saw it. The moment Marcus walked through the door with a swollen eye and a defeated slump to his shoulders, she recognized the mixture of shame and defiance in his expression. The same look her daughter had worn countless times. Before you say anything, Marcus began, dropping his backpack by the door. Principal Parker already called you. Eleanor nodded. He did. Said you got into a fight defending yourself, and you'll have detention for a week. She gestured to the kitchen table. Sit. I need to put something on that eye. Marcus seemed surprised by her calm reaction. He sank into a chair while Eleanor retrieved an ice pack from the freezer, wrapping it in a dish towel. You're not mad? He asked cautiously. Eleanor handed him the ice pack. Sonori, hold this against your eye. And I didn't say I wasn't mad. I'm reserving judgment until I hear your side of the story. As Marcus pressed the ice to his face, wincing slightly, Eleanor sat across from him, waiting. The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the background, marking the quiet moment between them. He said things about Mom, Marcus finally said, his voice low. And he tore up my drawings of her. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, an old pain resurfacing. Her daughter, beautiful, troubled Sophia, had been gone from their lives for 7 years now, lost to the prison system and her own demons. But she lived on in Marcus's careful sketches, rendered from childhood memories and old photographs. I'm sorry that happened, Eleanor said, reaching across to place her hand over his free one. Those drawings are precious to you. Principal Parker says they'll get my sketchbook back, Marcus said, but it won't be the same. The pages were ripped. His voice caught. I lost control, Gran. Just like before. No, Eleanor said firmly. Not like before. At Lakeside, you lashed out because you were hurting and alone. This time you defended yourself after trying to walk away. There's a world of difference. Marcus looked unconvinced. But I still ended up fighting. I still couldn't keep it together. You're 17, not 70, Eleanor said with gentle exasperation. You're still learning to navigate a world that isn't always kind. The question isn't whether you'll make mistakes. We all do. But whether you learn from them. She squeezed his hand. Principal Parker seems to understand that. He could have expelled you, but he didn't. He's giving you a chance to do better next time. Yeah, Marcus said, adjusting the ice pack. He was actually pretty decent about it. Different from my last principal. Eleanor studied her grandson's face, noting the surprise in his voice. Maybe he sees what I see, a young man who's trying his best in difficult circumstances. A hint of a smile touched Marcus's lips. Maybe. He hesitated. Oliver was waiting for me after. He didn't care that I got into a fight. He was just worried about me. That's what friends do, Eleanor said. They see past the mistakes to the person underneath. The tension in Marcus's shoulders eased slightly. Yeah, I guess they do. Later that evening, after dinner and homework, Eleanor found Marcus sitting on the fire escape outside his bedroom window, a spot he retreated to when needing to think. She climbed out to join him, the metal grating cold beneath her. Above them, the city lights obscured most stars, but a few persistent ones shone through. The distant sound of traffic created an urban lullaby they'd both grown accustomed to. Your mom loved looking at the stars, Eleanor said softly. When she was little, we'd drive out to the countryside just to see them properly. She knew all the constellations. Marcus nodded. I remember. She taught me Orion and the Big Dipper before I learned the alphabet. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sharing the bittersweet memory. I got a call after dinner, Eleanor said eventually. From Principal Parker. Marcus tensed. What did he want? To invite us to dinner on Sunday, Eleanor said, watching her grandson's reaction carefully. At his home, he said Oliver suggested it. Surprise flickered across Marcus's face. Really? Why? Maybe because that's what friends do, Eleanor echoed her earlier words. They want to know each other's families, connect the different parts of their lives. Marcus seemed to consider this, looking out at the city skyline. Do you want to go? I think we should, Eleanor said. It might be good for both of us to expand our circle a bit. Unless you'd rather not? Marcus was quiet for so long that Eleanor thought he might refuse. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a cautious hope that made her heart ache. No, I want to go, he said. It's just been a while since we did something like that. Went to someone's house for dinner. Eleanor wrapped an arm around his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him. No longer the frightened child who'd come to live with her, but not quite the man he would become. Then it's about time we started, don't you think? She said. Marcus leaned into her slightly, a gesture of affection he allowed himself less often as he'd grown older. Yeah, I think it is. Below them, a siren wailed in the distance, rising and falling like a question seeking its answer. Above, the stars continued their patient vigil, witnesses to all the small moments of healing that, strung together, might someday form a path forward. Sunday dinner at the Parker residence became a turning point, not just for Marcus and Oliver, but for their families as well. What began as a slightly awkward gathering of relative strangers evolved into a warm evening of shared stories and genuine connection. Eleanor Wilson, who had raised her own daughter alone before taking on her grandson, found an unexpected ally in Richard Parker, a single father navigating the complexities of teenage parenting. Their conversation flowed easily, discovering common ground in their love of gardening, old films, and the particular challenges of raising boys who felt deeply but struggled to express those feelings. For Marcus and Oliver, seeing their guardians connect added another dimension to their friendship. As they helped clear the dinner dishes, Oliver nudged Marcus. "They're getting along," he said with pleased surprise. Marcus nodded, watching his grandmother laugh at something Richard had said. "Yeah, it's nice seeing Gran talk to someone who isn't me or her bridge club." "Same with my dad," Oliver admitted. "Since the divorce, he mostly just works and reads history books. I can't remember the last time he had an actual conversation with another adult that wasn't about school administration." After dinner, while the adults continued talking over coffee, Oliver led Marcus to his room, a space that reflected its owner's eclectic interests. Bookshelves overflowed with science texts and fantasy novels. A telescope stood by the window. The walls were covered with maps, historical, topographical, celestial, creating a collage of different ways to understand the world. "Wow," Marcus said, taking it all in. "This is amazing." Oliver shrugged but looked pleased. "It's a bit much, I know. Dad calls it my external brain." "No, I like it," Marcus said, drawn to a large wall map marked with colored pins. "What's this one?" "Places I want to visit someday," Oliver explained, coming to stand beside him. "Red pins are historical sites. Blue are natural wonders. Green are cities with great museums." Marcus studied the map, noting how the pins clustered in unexpected patterns. "There are a lot in South America. The Amazon, Machu Picchu, Patagonia," Oliver said, his voice taking on the animated quality it always did when discussing his passions. "Did you know the Atacama Desert is the driest place on Earth? Some weather stations there have never recorded rainfall." The genuine enthusiasm made Marcus smile. "I didn't know that." "No." "Where would you go?" Oliver asked. "If you could go anywhere?" Marcus considered the question, scanning the world map. "Japan, maybe." "For the art." "And New Zealand for the landscapes." He hesitated. "My mom always talked about seeing the northern lights someday." Oliver reached into a drawer and pulled out a green pin, offering it to Marcus. "Add them." The simple gesture, being invited to leave his mark on someone else's dreams, affected Marcus more than he could express. Carefully, he placed pins in northern Finland for the aurora, Kyoto for Japanese art traditions, and New Zealand's South Island. "There," Oliver said with satisfaction. "Now they're part of the plan." "The plan?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Well, someone has to go with me to all these places," Oliver said, as if it were obvious. "Might as well be you." The casual declaration of long-term friendship hung between them, warming the space. Before Marcus could respond, Oliver turned to his bookshelf and pulled down a leather-bound volume. "I have something for you," he said, suddenly looking nervous. "I was going to wait, but... Here." He handed Marcus what proved to be a sketchbook, higher quality than any Marcus had owned before, with heavy paper designed for proper artwork. "I know it doesn't replace what Donovan damaged," Oliver said quickly, "but I thought maybe you could start something new." Marcus ran his fingers over the cover, speechless. The gift itself was generous, but it was the thought behind it, the recognition of what art meant to him, that left him struggling for words. "Thank you," he finally managed. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Oliver assured him. "Just promise you'll show me what you create in it." Marcus nodded, clutching the sketchbook. "I will." Downstairs, the sound of laughter drifted up from the living room, their families finding connection despite different backgrounds and circumstances. Outside, early evening had settled over the neighborhood, the sky painted in gentle twilight hues. In that moment, surrounded by maps to places he'd never been, holding a blank book waiting to be filled, Marcus felt something he'd nearly forgotten existed, the sense of a future opening up, full of possibilities rather than threats. "I'm glad you stood up for me that day," Oliver said quietly. "Even if it was just about a notebook." Marcus shook his head. It wasn't just about a notebook. It was about what was right. He paused, finding the courage to add, "And I'm glad too. Best decision I ever made." As they rejoined their families downstairs, Marcus carried with him not just a new sketchbook, but the growing certainty that the act of courage that had connected him to Oliver had changed the trajectory of both their lives. And perhaps, in some small but significant way, the culture of Westlake High itself. The weeks that followed brought gradual but meaningful changes to Westlake High. Marcus and Oliver's friendship, born of a single moment of courage, continued to grow, creating ripples that extended beyond them. The first change was subtle. Donovan Hayes, after serving his 2-week suspension, returned to school noticeably subdued. The hallway confrontation with Marcus, combined with Principal Parker's subsequent intervention, had something unexpected. It had made him visible in ways he didn't enjoy. Teachers were watching him more closely. Fellow students, sensing the shift in power dynamics, were less quick to laugh at his bullying attempts. More significantly, the friendship between Marcus and Oliver began to reconfigure the social ecosystem. What started as two outsiders finding connection evolved into something like a sanctuary for others who didn't quite fit the rigid social categories of high school. It began with Zoe Chen, a brilliant sophomore with a passion for robotics, who asked if she could join them at lunch one day after Marcus had defended her design and engineering class. Then came Diego Ramirez, a quiet senior with a stutter who discovered that neither Marcus nor Oliver rushed him or finished his sentences. Soon their lunch table, once a place of isolation, became a gathering spot for a diverse group of students united primarily by their appreciation for authentic connection. Principal Parker observed these developments with quiet satisfaction. As an educator with decades of experience, he recognized the subtle signs of cultural shift: increased participation in class from previously silent students, fewer disciplinary incidents in common areas, even a small uptick in attendance rates. While he couldn't attribute all these positive changes to the ripple effects of one friendship, he understood that social recalibrations often began with seemingly small events. One Tuesday afternoon in late November, Richard was reviewing budget allocations when Mrs. Gonzalez buzzed his intercom. Mr. Parker, Marcus Wilson is here to see you. He says it's important." Richard raised his eyebrows in surprise. While Marcus had become a regular presence in their home on Sundays, he rarely sought Richard out at school. "Send him in, please." Marcus entered, his tall frame still slightly hunched as if apologizing for taking up space, a habit Richard had noticed gradually diminishing over recent weeks. "Mr. Wilson," Richard greeted him. "What can I do for you?" Marcus took a seat, hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I have an idea I wanted to discuss with you, sir." "About the school?" Richard leaned forward, intrigued. "I'm listening." "It's about the art program," Marcus said, his voice gaining confidence as he continued. "Or really the lack of one. I've been thinking about how many students here are interested in art, but don't have an outlet for it. No classes beyond the basic requirement, no club, nothing." Richard nodded. The arts had suffered under budget constraints in recent years. "That's unfortunately true. Budget cuts have hit those areas hardest." "I understand that," Marcus said, "but I was thinking we might be able to start something that doesn't require much funding. An art club that meets after school. Students bringing their own supplies initially, maybe working toward a small showcase at the end of the year." The proposal was thoughtful and practical, acknowledging limitations while seeking solutions. Richard felt a surge of pride that surprised him with its intensity. "That's an excellent idea," he said. "Have you thought about faculty sponsorship? We'd need a teacher to supervise." Marcus nodded. "I spoke with Miss Rivera from the Spanish department. She majored in art before switching to languages, and she said she'd be willing to sponsor us if you approved." "You've done your homework," Richard observed. "How many students do you think would participate?" "At least 10, based on people I've already talked to," Marcus said. "Maybe more once word spreads." Richard made some notes. "Would you be willing to lead this initiative?" It would mean creating a formal proposal, establishing guidelines, coordinating with Miss Rivera. "I would," Marcus said with a certainty that seemed to surprise even him. Oliver said he'd help with the organizational aspects, even though he can't draw to save his life. A small smile accompanied this last comment. "I'm impressed, Marcus," Richard said honestly. "This shows real leadership and initiative." He paused, then added, "You've come a long way since that first meeting in my office after the fight." A flush colored Marcus's cheeks, but he didn't look away. "Thank you, sir. I've had good people in my corner." Richard nodded, understanding the unspoken acknowledgement. "Well, you have my provisional approval. Work with Miss Rivera to draft a formal proposal, and we'll make this happen." As Marcus left, visibly energized by the positive response, Richard reflected on the transformation he'd witnessed in this young man over the past 2 months. From a withdrawn transfer student to someone who initiated positive change, the journey spoke volumes about resilience, about the power of connection, and about what could happen when young people were given both support and challenge. Later that week, as the first snow of the season dusted Westlake, a small notice appeared on the school's bulletin board. "Art Collective, express yourself. Find your voice. Create community. All skill levels welcome. First meeting, Thursday after school. Room A2, 10 faculty sponsor. Ms. Rivera student coordinators, Marcus Wilson and Oliver Parker." By Thursday, 19 students showed up. Some established artists, others who had never picked up a pencil for creative purposes. Standing before them, Marcus felt a strange reversal. 3 months ago, he'd been the outsider, seeking invisibility. Now he was creating a space where others could be seen. "Welcome to the first meeting of the art collective," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "This isn't about being good or bad at art. It's about expression, finding your voice, and maybe building something meaningful together." As he spoke, he caught Oliver's encouraging smile from the back of the room, and beyond him, through the classroom door's window, the brief appearance of Principal Parker, observing with quiet approval before continuing on his rounds. In that moment, Marcus understood that his small act of courage in the hallway, standing up for a classmate he barely knew, had been not an ending, but a beginning. The ripples continued to spread, touching lives in ways he couldn't have imagined. And as he looked around at the circle of faces, some familiar, others new, all present because they sought connection through creativity, Marcus felt something he'd long thought lost to him: the simple, profound sense of belonging. Winter descended on Westlake with a series of snowstorms that transformed the school grounds into a crystalline landscape. As December progressed, the art collective flourished beyond anyone's expectations, growing to nearly 30 regular members who gathered twice weekly in room 210. For Marcus, the club became more than just an artistic outlet. It became a purpose. Under his and Oliver's guidance, students who had previously existed in separate social spheres found common ground through creativity. Football players experimented with charcoal alongside theater kids trying their hand at sculpture. Freshmen received mentoring from seniors who, just months earlier, wouldn't have acknowledged their existence. Even more remarkably, the changes extended beyond club meetings. The hallways of Westlake High felt different. Still imperfect, still occasionally cruel, but with new pockets of kindness and connection that hadn't existed before. On the last day before winter break, Principal Parker invited Marcus to his office. When Marcus arrived, he found not just the principal waiting, but also Ms. Rivera and Oliver. "Thank you for coming, Marcus," Richard said, gesturing for him to take a seat. "We wanted to discuss something with you before break begins." Marcus glanced at Oliver, who offered an encouraging smile but no explanation. "I've been observing the art collective's progress," Richard continued. "Mrs. Rivera has kept me updated on attendance, projects, and the overall impact. I have to say, I'm impressed by what you've accomplished in such a short time." "Thank you, sir," Marcus said, still uncertain where this was heading. "But it's not just me. Oliver handles all the organizational stuff, and Miss Rivera has been amazing." "True, Miss," Rivera said with a warm smile. "But the vision and the heart of it came from you, Marcus. You created a space where students feel safe to express themselves and connect across social boundaries." "That's remarkable." Richard nodded in agreement. "Which brings us to why we asked you here today. The district has a program for student leadership recognition, specifically for initiatives that improve school culture. I'd like to nominate the Art Collective, with you as its founding leader." Marcus blinked in surprise. "What would that mean exactly?" "Recognition at the district level," Richard explained. "Possible grant funding for supplies. And for you personally, it would be a significant addition to your college applications." College. The word hung in the air, weighted with implications. Marcus had been avoiding the topic, unsure if higher education was even possible given his family's financial situation. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "Say yes," Oliver interjected with a grin. "You deserve this, Marcus." Miss Rivera nodded her agreement. "The impact you've had goes beyond art. I've seen students who never spoke in class finding their voice. That matters." Marcus looked at the three faces watching him expectantly and felt a surge of gratitude so intense it was almost overwhelming. How had he gone from being the isolated transfer student to this? All because he'd made one choice in a hallway, deciding that another person's pain mattered more than his fear. "Yes," he said finally. "Thank you. I'd be honored." As they discussed the details of the nomination process, Marcus found himself thinking about the upcoming holiday break. For the first time in years, he was looking forward to Christmas rather than simply enduring it. Eleanor had invited the Parkers to join them for Christmas Eve dinner, a gesture that had visibly moved Richard, who had been planning a quiet holiday alone with Oliver, while his ex-wife vacationed in Europe with her new husband. Later, as Marcus and Oliver walked home through the snow-covered streets, a comfortable silence stretched between them. The winter afternoon was already darkening, holiday lights beginning to glimmer from houses and storefronts. "You're quiet," Oliver observed eventually. Second thoughts about the nomination? Marcus shook his head. No, it's not that. I was just thinking about how different everything is from 3 months ago. He paused, watching his breath form clouds in the cold air. Sometimes I can't believe how much has changed since that day in the hallway. Oliver nodded. I think about that too. How different things might be if you hadn't been there, or if you'd walked away like everyone else always did. I almost did walk away, Marcus admitted. I was scared. But you didn't, Oliver said simply. That's what matters. They stopped at the corner where their paths would diverge. Oliver heading to the older neighborhood where the principal's house stood, Marcus to the apartment building where he and Eleanor lived. My dad asked me something interesting this morning, Oliver said, adjusting his scarf against the cold. He asked if I thought you knew who I was that day, that I was his son. Marcus raised his eyebrows. What did you tell him? The truth, that you had no idea. Oliver said with a small smile, that you stood up for me because it was the right thing to do, not because you thought it might benefit you somehow. He paused. I think that meant a lot to him. People are usually nice to me because of who my dad is, not just because, well, because of me. The confession carried the weight of long experience, of friendships formed for strategic reasons rather than genuine connection. I'm not friends with you because of your dad, Marcus said firmly, though he is pretty cool for a principal. Oliver laughed. I'll tell him you said so. He hesitated, then added more seriously. I've never had a friend like you before, Marcus. Someone who sees me, not just my circumstances. Right back at you, Marcus said, the simple truth of it warming him despite the cold. As they parted ways with plans to meet the next day, Marcus walked the remaining blocks to his apartment building with a lightness that had nothing to do with the holiday season and everything to do with the fundamental human need to be truly seen and accepted. Upstairs, he found Eleanor hanging a small wreath on their apartment door, her cheeks flushed from the effort of stretching to reach the hook. Let me help with that, he offered, easily reaching up to hang the decoration. Thank you, dear, she said, stepping back to admire it. Not exactly the Rockefeller Center tree, but it adds a touch of festivity, don't you think? Marcus nodded, following her inside where their modest decorations, accumulated over years of Christmases together, created a warm atmosphere in the small living room. A 3-foot artificial tree stood in the corner, decorated with ornaments that Eleanor had saved from Marcus's childhood and before. Colored lights outlined the window, casting multicolored shadows across the room. How was the last day before break? Eleanor asked, returning to the kitchen where cookie dough waited to be shaped. Good, Marcus said, setting his backpack down and washing his hands to help. Principal Parker wants to nominate the art collective for some district leadership award. Eleanor looked up, pride evident in her expression. Marcus, that's wonderful. You've worked so hard on that club. It still doesn't seem real sometimes, he admitted, carefully forming dough into small circles. All of it, the club, having friends, even just not dreading school every day. Eleanor set down her rolling pin and placed a flour-dusted hand on his arm. It is real, though. You've built something meaningful, both for yourself and others. She paused, then added softly, your mother would be so proud of you. The mention of his mother, rare between them, sent a pang through Marcus's chest. Not the sharp grief of earlier years, but a softer ache of what might have been. Do you think she'd be clean by now, if things had been different? He asked quietly. Eleanor's expression softened with compassion. I don't know, sweetheart. Addiction is a powerful disease. But I know she loved you in her own way. And I know she'd be amazed by the young man you've become. Marcus nodded, returning to the cookies to hide the sudden moisture in his eyes. I've been drawing her again, he admitted, in the new sketchbook Oliver gave me. Not just memories from before, but how I imagine she might look now. Healthy, happy. I'd love to see those drawings when you're ready to share them, Eleanor said gently. Maybe after Christmas, Marcus said, then changing the subject. What else do we need to prepare for Christmas Eve dinner? As they discussed menu plans and grocery lists, Marcus felt a familiar sense of gratitude for his grandmother, for her unwavering support, her quiet strength, her ability to create home in the midst of loss. Somehow that gratitude extended outward now, encompassing Oliver and Richard, the art collective members, even Westlake High itself. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft flakes illuminated by the colored lights in the window. Inside, warmth and the scent of baking cookies created a sanctuary against winter's chill. And in Marcus's heart, the knowledge that one moment of courage had opened doors he never knew existed. Christmas Eve dinner at the Wilson apartment became a blend of traditions and new connections. Eleanor's traditional feast, scaled up for guests but still featuring her famous sweet potato casserole and homemade rolls, filled the small space with mouth-watering aromas. Richard brought wine for the adults and sparkling cider for the boys, along with a chocolate pecan pie from the bakery downtown. What might have been an awkward gathering of two very different families instead felt natural, as if they'd been sharing holidays for years rather than meeting for the first time just weeks ago. Conversation flowed easily around the table that Eleanor had extended, with a card table covered in her best tablecloth. "These rolls are extraordinary, Eleanor," Richard said, reaching for his third. "I haven't had homemade bread this good since my grandmother was alive." Eleanor beamed at the compliment. "Family recipe. I've been teaching Marcus, though his attempts still come out looking like misshapen meteors." "Hey," Marcus protested, though he was smiling. "The last batch was almost round." Almost being the operative word, Oliver teased, earning a light punch on the arm from his friend. "Well, I'm impressed regardless," Richard said. "My culinary expertise ends at scrambled eggs and grilled cheese sandwiches. Dad once set off the smoke alarm trying to make toast." Oliver stage whispered. "The fire department came and everything." Richard groaned good-naturedly. "That was one time, and in my defense, that toaster had very sensitive settings." Laughter warmed the room as they continued eating, sharing stories and gradually building the easy rhythm that marks true connection. After dinner, they exchanged simple gifts. Nothing extravagant, but thoughtfully chosen. Marcus received art supplies from Richard and a vintage comic book from Oliver that featured the first appearance of his favorite superhero. Eleanor was genuinely touched by the gardening tool set from the Parkers, especially when Oliver explained that he'd researched the best brands for someone with arthritis. Richard seemed particularly moved by his gift from Marcus. A framed pencil portrait of Oliver, captured with such sensitivity and attention to detail that it revealed aspects of his son even he hadn't fully noticed. The quiet intelligence in his eyes, the slight upturn of his mouth that suggested a private amusement, the gentle determination in his jawline. "This is remarkable, Marcus," Richard said quietly, studying the portrait. "You've captured him perfectly." Marcus ducked his head, still uncomfortable with praise for his art, despite the growth of the art collective. "Thanks. I'm glad you like it." "Like it? I'll treasure it," Richard said with such sincerity that Marcus had to look away, overwhelmed by the reaction. As the evening progressed, they moved to the small living room where Eleanor had insisted on making hot chocolate the proper way, with real chocolate melted into milk, topped with homemade whipped cream. They settled in with their mugs, the room illuminated primarily by the colored lights of the Christmas tree. "We have a tradition in our family," Eleanor said. "On Christmas Eve, we each share something we're grateful for from the past year, and something we hope for in the year ahead." She glanced around at their guests. "You're welcome to join us, or just listen. No pressure. I'd be happy to participate," Richard said, and Oliver nodded his agreement. "I'll start," Eleanor offered. "I'm grateful for expanded horizons this year. New friends, new connections." She smiled warmly at the Parkers. "And for the coming year, I hope to finally take that community college gardening course I've been putting off." "You should definitely do that, Gran," Marcus encouraged. "You'd be amazing." "I'll go next," Richard said. "I'm grateful for renewal, seeing fresh perspectives, both professionally and personally." His gaze rested briefly on his son. "For next year, I hope to continue building a school culture where all students feel valued and seen." Oliver shifted slightly in his seat. "I'm grateful for unexpected friendship," he said, glancing at Marcus, "for finding someone who gets me, who doesn't expect me to be anything other than myself." He paused. "And next year, I hope to be brave enough to apply for that summer astronomy program at the university, even though it's really competitive." "You should definitely apply," Marcus said firmly. "Your star knowledge is scary good." All eyes turned to Marcus, waiting for his contribution. He took a deep breath, finding it both easier and harder to share with this expanded circle. "I'm grateful for second chances," he said quietly. "For the opportunity to redefine myself beyond my past mistakes." He looked at each of them in turn. "And for next year, I hope to keep building something positive. Through the art collective, through friendship, maybe even through college if that's possible." A soft silence followed his words, comfortable rather than awkward. Outside, snow continued to fall, insulating the world in quiet white. Inside, the small gathering of two families, both reshaped by loss and circumstance, had formed something new and precious together. Later, as the Parkers prepared to leave, bundling up against the winter night, Marcus noticed Oliver lingering by the Christmas tree, studying one of the older ornaments, a simple clay star with a child's handprint impressed into it. I made that in first grade, Marcus explained, joining him. Mom helped me with the paint. Oliver nodded, not with pity but with understanding. You have good memories of her too, not just the hard stuff. Yeah, Marcus said. She was sick, but she was still my mom. Still is, I guess, wherever she is now. Oliver hesitated, then said, My mom sent me a text earlier. Just Merry Christmas and a tree emoji. He shrugged, trying for nonchalance but not quite achieving it. At least she remembered this year. Marcus recognized the complex emotions behind those simple words. The hurt, the longing, the resigned acceptance. It's okay to miss her, you know, even when she disappoints you. Yeah, Oliver said quietly. I know. At the door, the adults exchanged warm hugs while the boys opted for their usual shoulder bump. Affection disguised as casual contact in the way of teenage boys everywhere. Thank you for a wonderful evening, Richard said to Eleanor, his sincere gratitude evident. You've made our holiday truly special. The pleasure was ours, Eleanor assured him. Let's not make it a whole year before we do this again. As Marcus and Eleanor watched father and son walk carefully down the snowy street to their parked car, a companionable silence settled between grandmother and grandson. I like them, Eleanor said simply. They're good people. Marcus nodded, thinking of all the ways his life had changed since that moment in the hallway. Yeah, they really are. That night, as snow whispered against the windows and the apartment settled into peaceful quiet, Marcus lay awake thinking about the year ahead. College applications, the art collective showcase, the continuing navigation of high school social dynamics. All of it seemed less daunting now that he wasn't facing it alone. From his bedside table, his phone lit up with a text message. Oliver had sent a photo of the portrait of him now hanging in their living room with a simple message. Dad put it in the place of honor. Says he sees something new in it every time he looks. You're actually magic with a pencil, you know that? Merry Christmas, friend. Marcus smiled in the darkness, typing back. Not magic. Just paying attention to what matters. Merry Christmas. He set the phone down and closed his eyes, feeling the weightless peace that comes from being truly known and accepted. Beyond his window, the snow continued its gentle descent, covering the city in possibilities. Winter break ended, and the students of Westlake High returned to classes amid the bleak landscape of January. But something had shifted during those 2 weeks away. A continuation of the changes that had been building since that fateful day in the hallway. The art collective resumed with renewed energy, its membership swelling as word spread about the welcoming atmosphere and creative freedom. Marcus found himself in the unexpected position of leader and mentor, helping younger students discover their artistic voices while continuing to develop his own. Oliver, emboldened by their friendship, began raising his hand more in classes beyond math and science, sharing his insights on literature and history. He submitted his application to the summer astronomy program, spending hours perfecting his personal statement with Marcus's encouragement. Even Donovan Hayes showed signs of change. After his suspension and the subsequent social recalibration, he'd returned less aggressive, more thoughtful. In late January, he surprised everyone by approaching Marcus between classes. Wilson, he said, lacking his usual bravado. Got a minute? Marcus tensed instinctively, then forced himself to relax. Sure. They stepped to the side of the hallway, away from the flow of students. Donovan seemed uncharacteristically uncomfortable, shifting his weight and avoiding direct eye contact. I wanted to say, he began, then stopped, recalibrating. Look, I was a jerk. About your mom, about everything? That was wrong. The awkward apology hung between them. Marcus studied Donovan's face, searching for signs of insincerity but finding none. Why are you telling me this now? Marcus asked. Donovan shrugged, a gesture that seemed defensive, but also honest. My dad made me go to this counselor after the suspension. At first I thought it was BS, but some of what she said made sense. About how I treat people. About why. He paused. Anyway, I'm not asking to be friends or anything. Just wanted to say I was wrong. That's all. Marcus nodded slowly. I appreciate that. It takes guts to admit when you've messed up. Believe me, I know. Something like relief crossed Donovan's face. Yeah, well, that's all I wanted to say. As Donovan turned to leave, Marcus called after him. Hey, Hayes. Donovan looked back. The art collective is open to everyone, you know. If you ever wanted to check it out. Surprise registered on Donovan's face, followed by a tentative nod before he continued down the hall. Oliver, who had witnessed the exchange from his locker, joined Marcus with raised eyebrows. Was that Donovan Hayes actually apologizing? Seems like it. Marcus said, still processing the unexpected interaction. Will wonders never cease? Oliver mused. Think he'll show up at Art Collective? Marcus shrugged. Probably not. But the invitation is there if he wants it. As winter slowly yielded to spring, the changes at Westlake continued to unfold. The district recognized the Art Collective with a leadership award, providing a small grant for supplies and featuring Marcus and Oliver in the district newsletter. Principal Parker used the success as leverage to secure additional funding for arts programs, arguing persuasively to the school board that student-led initiatives deserved institutional support. For Marcus personally, the most significant change came in March, when Eleanor received a letter that altered the trajectory of his future. He arrived home from school to find her sitting at the kitchen table, an opened envelope before her and tears in her eyes. "Gran?" he asked, immediately concerned. "What's wrong?" She looked up, and he realized the tears were of joy, not sadness. "Nothing's wrong," she said, holding up the letter. "Something's very right. This came today from Westlake Arts Foundation." Marcus took the letter, scanning its contents with growing disbelief. The foundation, impressed by his leadership of the Art Collective and the portfolio Principal Parker had submitted on his behalf, was offering him a full scholarship to the State University's prestigious art program. "This can't be real," he whispered. "It's very real," Eleanor assured him, her voice thick with emotion. "Richard called to confirm it before you got home. He submitted your work and a recommendation without telling us, wanting it to be a surprise if it came through." Marcus sank into a chair, overwhelmed. College had seemed like a distant possibility at best, given their financial circumstances. Now suddenly it was not just possible but certain. "I don't know what to say," he managed. Eleanor reached across the table to take his hand. "You don't need to say anything. Just know that this is what happens when you put good into the world, Marcus. Sometimes it comes back to you in ways you never expected." That evening, Marcus called Oliver to share the news, his voice still unsteady with disbelief and gratitude. "That's amazing!" Oliver exclaimed, his excitement palpable even through the phone. "I knew you could do it. Your work is incredible, Marcus. They're lucky to have you." "I still can't believe your dad did this," Marcus said. "Submitting my portfolio, writing a recommendation. Why would he go to all that trouble?" "Because he sees what's special in you," Oliver said simply. "We all do." Later, Marcus sat on the fire escape outside his window, gazing up at the few visible stars through the city's light pollution. The night was cool but not cold, with the first hints of spring softening the air. Below, traffic moved in its usual patterns. Above, the constants of the night sky offered their ancient comfort. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from the scared, angry boy who'd been expelled from Lakeside after a violent incident, to the young man now holding a college scholarship and leading a thriving art program. All because he'd made one choice to stand up for someone else, never imagining how that single action would reshape his life. His phone buzzed with a text from Richard Parker. "Eleanor told me she shared the news. I hope you're not upset I submitted your work without telling you. I believe in your talent, Marcus." The committee was unanimously impressed. "This is just the beginning for you." Marcus typed back, "Not upset. Grateful beyond words. Thank you for seeing something in me worth believing in." The simple exchange contained multitudes. The complex relationship between student and principal, between friend's father and son's friend, between mentor and mentee. Richard had become something Marcus had never expected to find. A male role model who demonstrated that strength could exist in kindness, in vulnerability, in standing up for others. As spring blossomed across Westlake, the Art Collective prepared for its first showcase. Students who had never before displayed their work publicly now collaborated on an exhibition that would transform the school's gymnasium into a gallery for one special evening. The night of the showcase arrived clear and warm, a perfect spring evening. Students, parents, teachers, and community members filled the transformed space, moving between displays of paintings, drawings, sculptures, and digital art. In the center, a collaborative installation piece represented the collective's core mission. Individual artistic expressions combined to create something larger than any single contribution. Principal Parker had arranged for local media coverage, and a reporter from the town newspaper moved through the crowd, interviewing students about their work. When she approached Marcus, he initially tried to deflect attention to others, uncomfortable in the spotlight. "But you're the founder," the reporter persisted. "What inspired you to start the Art Collective?" Marcus hesitated, then glanced across the room where Oliver was enthusiastically explaining a science-themed art piece to an elderly couple. "I guess it started with one moment of connection. he said carefully. I stood up for someone when it would have been easier not to. That led to a friendship, which made me realize how many of us were feeling isolated. Art became the bridge. And what would you say to other students who might feel invisible or voiceless in their schools? The reporter asked. Marcus considered the question seriously. I'd say that finding your voice doesn't always mean speaking louder than everyone else. Sometimes it's about creating spaces where everyone can be heard. And sometimes the smallest act of courage can start something bigger than you ever imagined. Across the gymnasium, Eleanor watched her grandson with quiet pride, standing beside Richard Parker, who had become both colleague and friend over the past months. He's come so far, she said softly. Sometimes I can hardly believe he's the same boy who arrived here so angry and afraid. Richard nodded. He found his purpose. And in doing so, he helped others find theirs. He paused, including my son. They watched as Oliver and Marcus converged beside a striking charcoal drawing, Marcus's contribution to the showcase. It depicted two young men sitting on a fire escape, looking up at a star-filled sky, their faces illuminated by possibilities neither could see coming. The Stars We Choose, read the simple title card beside it. As the evening wound down, students and parents gradually dispersed, carrying with them new appreciation for the artistic voices within their community. Marcus stayed behind with the core art collective members to begin the cleanup process. Leave it until morning, Principal Parker suggested, approaching the group. You've all earned a break. Go celebrate what you've accomplished. The students needed little convincing, collecting their personal belongings and heading out into the spring evening, voices animated with the success of the showcase. Marcus lingered, looking around at the transformed space, at tangible evidence of how much had changed in 7 months. Penny, for your thoughts, Richard asked, joining him. I was just thinking about that day in the hallway, Marcus admitted. How different everything might be if I'd walked away instead of standing up for Oliver. Richard nodded. Life often hinges on such moments, doesn't it? The choices we make when no one's looking or when everyone is. I didn't know he was your son, Marcus said, feeling it important to state this explicitly. I know, Richard interrupted gently. That's what makes it significant. You did the right thing simply because it was right, not for any advantage or recognition. He paused. That kind of moral courage is rare, Marcus. It's what the world needs more of. Before Marcus could respond, Oliver bounded back into the gymnasium. Dad, Marcus, are you coming? Everyone's heading to Rosie's diner to celebrate. Richard smiled at his son's enthusiasm. You two go ahead. I need to lock up here. Eleanor and I will join you shortly. As Marcus followed Oliver out into the mild spring evening, the sky above them was painted in twilight hues, the dark blue of night encroaching on the fading orange and pink of sunset. Stars were beginning to appear, first the brightest and then gradually the fainter ones, each a pinpoint of light against the vastness. Hey, Oliver said, pausing on the steps. Did I ever tell you that astronomers believe every atom in our bodies was once part of a star? No, Marcus said, looking up at the emerging constellations. That's pretty amazing. It is, Oliver agreed. It means we're all made of stardust, essentially, connected to the universe in the most fundamental way possible. Marcus smiled at his friend's perpetual wonder at scientific facts. Is there a reason you're telling me this now? Oliver shrugged, but his expression was thoughtful, just thinking about connections. How your standing up for me that day connected our lives in ways neither of us could have predicted. How that connection spread to other people through the art collective. He gestured toward the stars above them. Like constellations, individual points of light that form patterns when you connect them. The insight struck Marcus as profound in its simplicity. The patterns we choose to see, he murmured. Exactly, Oliver said. Come on, Stardust. They're waiting for us at Rosie's. As they walked toward the diner where friends and family awaited, Marcus felt a sense of completion, not of ending, but of having come full circle to a new beginning. 7 months ago, he'd been a solitary figure, head down, trying to navigate the hostile territory of a new school. Now he moved through the world differently, head up, connected, visible, all because of one moment in a hallway when a bullied teen stood up for a classmate, unaware the kid's dad was the school principal. Unaware, too, of how that single act of courage would transform not just his own life, but an entire community. Behind them, Westlake High stood outlined against the darkening sky, its windows still illuminated by the lights of the art collective showcase. Inside those walls, hundreds of drawings, paintings, and sculptures testified to voices finding expression, to individuals discovering connection through creativity. Ahead, the warm glow of Rosie's diner beckoned, where Eleanor and Richard would soon join the celebration. Their own unexpected friendship, a testament to how one act of kindness could ripple outward in ever-widening circles. And above it all, the stars continued their ancient vigil, bearing witness to the small but significant ways that human lives intersect, connect, and ultimately transform one another, one courageous choice at a time.